Good afternoon and welcome to Markets Today. I'm your host, Mbithe Mwema. It is the second week of December, the 7th of December. We want to see what will happen this week, but more importantly, give you a wrap-up of what was happening last week, what was driving the financial markets in Kenya in that particular week. We start off each and every Monday rather, here on Markets Today, taking a look at what was happening in the markets, and then we'll also have an interesting topical conversation in as far as what the impact of taxes is. I will introduce that conversation as well as the guest later on in the show. But first, let's take a look at what was happening on the Nairobi Securities Exchange last week. We've seen a lot of heavy demand for Safaricom as a stock. This actually pushed up the week-on-week turnover 126 percentage points compared to the previous week, with a cumulative turnover of 5.32 billion. That's the total value of turnover that was traded last week. Foreigners were the majority of the investors over the week, accounting for 90% of the total demand over that week. Let's take a look at the indices as well as the key parameters to get a breakdown of what was happening. By virtue of the key indices, we had the Nairobi All Share Index going up on a trajectory week on week, largely because of the uptick on Safaricom, which crossed the 32 shilling mark, and this particular index closed at 148.12. Let's see what else was happening on the NSE over that particular week. So you have the weekly performance again there, tracking the NSE 20 index, which was up on a week-on-week basis, closing at 1,786.42 points. Let's see what was happening on turnover for that week. As I had mentioned, 126% gain was the week-on-week performance, led each and every single day by Safaricom. Monday, 1.7 billion in terms of the turnover traded. Tuesday, 710. Wednesday, 780 million. Thursday, a billion, as well as 1.1 billion on Friday. This has been very intense activity, especially at the tail end of the year, when NSE begins to grow a little bit quiet. But we have seen Safaricom continue to get a lot of foreign investor interest, and this has been the precursor to the performance that we saw last week. We will be looking to see whether the foreign investors will be back this particular week, largely chasing Safaricom. Let's see who the top gainers as well as the top losers for that week were. Top losers, Nairobi Business Ventures was up 505.63 percentage points in 1 week alone. Nairobi Business Ventures listed additional shares on the NSE, and it also got in new investors into its particular business. This announcement came in on Monday, and on Tuesday, this stock touched a high of about 700 percentage points on a one day. Based on the NSE trading rules, for any particular day, if there is a corporate announcement, then the 10% up or 10% down ceiling or floor, if you like, is actually waived off, and this particular share can actually trade up or trade down to reflect investor sentiment. This was the unique case for Nairobi Business Ventures on Tuesday, but for the remainder of the week, we did see it lose a little bit of ground to close the entire week at up 505.63 percentage points. Olympia Capital gained 14.8, whereas Kabasit Investments was up 10.65 percentage points, losing a little bit of ground over the week. Then we had Eveready at 9.9 percentage points gain, and British American Tobacco gained 7.53% over that particular week. Let's take a look at what was happening in terms of the losers on a week-on-week basis. Express Kenya shed 14 percentage points, Crown Paints was down 7.62, East African Cables down 7 percentage points, TPS down 6.7%, BOC was down 6.27 percentage points. That's just an overview of what was happening in one of the financial markets in Kenya, and that's primarily the NSE. Let's take a look at what was happening in the Treasury market. That's the Treasury bill markets. An auction happens every Thursday, and the government is always out looking for 27 billion, cutting through the 91-day, 182-day, as well as the 364-day Treasury bills. Now, last week was pretty weak in terms of the attraction of this particular market by the domestic investors. Whereas the central bank was looking for 24 billion, it only accepted bids valued at 9.8 billion. The split was cutting across the 91-day, which attracted 2.9 billion compared to 4.5 billion in terms of bids, comparing this week to last week. For the 182, we only saw bids worth 2.68 billion, whereas the previous week we did see bids of 6.4 billion. And for the 364-day, the bids were 5.3 billion compared to 4.5 billion shillings. Looks like the liquidity in this particular market has been sort of fading off on a week-to-week basis. We continue to track it because it's an important parameter in terms of understanding the liquidity in the market and the possible outlook when it comes to looking at the interest rates on the short end of the curve. Let's see what happened to the interest rates in that particular week. There has been and continues to be an uptick in as far as interest rates are concerned. We have been tracking the 91-day, 182-day, and more specifically, the 364-day Treasury bill. That's last week, 3rd of December. The 364-day or the one-year T-bill came in at 8.2 percentage points, which was 50 bips ahead of what it recorded last week, which was 8.15 percentage points. This particular T-bill, the 364-day T-bill, is really a precursor of their outlook when it comes to the short-term interest rates. It has been on an upward trajectory, albeit gradually, but we do expect it to keep going up and up, at least in the short term, just to reflect the liquidity as well as the investor appetite for what is happening in the Treasury bill market. 8.2 is where the one-year investment into the government of Kenya is at, and we think there could be a little bit more room for an upward trajectory between now and next year. Let's see what was happening with currency. So currency dropped off about 1 percentage point for that entire week to close at 111. There has been discourse of increasing weakness in this particular market, but then the central bank has actually come out to assure investors that everything is okay. Last week, we did see the central bank actually pumping dollars into the market to stave off any weakness. A couple of other things also happened in this particular week. The Central Bank of Kenya last week on Tuesday, it met with the Association of Manufacturers, meeting select manufacturers to discuss the issuance of how do they get availability of dollars to fund their imports. The availability has not been quite rampant as expected, and this was a conversation that the central bank was having with stakeholders to see how to manage it a little better. In the same vein, one of the analyst communities actually came out with a report saying that the currency should weaken even further, largely because of the fundamentals of the country. Today, we are at 111 and we continue to track to see what will happen in the short term. But then there is an expectation that the Central Bank of Kenya will have access to credit lines from the IMF and the World Bank to the tune of 3.5 billion shillings starting next year, which could possibly help stave off the weakness, at least in the short term. With regards to a roundup of the corporate news, earlier today there was an announcement by British American Tobacco, largest tobacco company in East and Central Africa, and the current CEO will be stepping down. We have the view of who the latest CEO is going to be. I think our team will be putting that up just shortly to give you a sense of what we expect to happen in terms of a change of the management at BAT. As you can see on your screens, the current CEO, that's Beverly Spencer Otambiyibo, will be leaving on the 31st of December. This was expected, her term has come to an end, but she will still remain holding an advisory role in as far as being able to guide the strategy for BAT. Beverly's key contribution has been enhancing the operational efficiencies for this particular manufacturer, and during her term, she has been able to deliver better margins, largely by cutting back on expenses. So certainly we wish her all the best in her new role. To take up her place, Mr. Crispin Achola will be the new CEO starting 1st of January 2021. Mr. Achola comes in from Kimberly-Clark and has extensive experience, having worked in Nigeria in the fast-moving consumer goods industry. His background as well as his experience will certainly be beneficial to BAT at this point in time when it tries to navigate moving into the space of how does it as a company enhance revenues and not only rely on operational efficiencies. In other words, how do you then begin to push the consumer product, which is cigarettes, into the market and distribute it in an efficient manner to be able to enhance and drive revenue growth, at least over the medium term. So Mr. Achola from us here at Markets Today, we certainly wish you all the best, and we hope we will be able to have a one-on-one once he settles down. That's pretty much what is happening in the financial markets last week and this week, and we take a break. When we come back, we had asked some of you to give us your questions last week on Friday on our Ask Mbithe segment. We have a lot of questions lined up, and we wanted to take a few minutes each day this week just to be able to address this. It's never too late for you. If you do have your phone, 20146, that's our SMS line. Please, we want to hear your comments or your questions on investments, and we have guaranteed that anytime we're having this show this particular week, we will allocate time to answer your questions. So we take a short break. When we come back, we will have a few minutes just relegated to that particular segment, and then thereafter, I will introduce our topic of the day as well as our guest who is in studio. See you after the break.